Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Platform Book Club. I am joined by the amazing Natasha Bowen, who's going to be talking to us about her new YA fantasy, The Skin of the Sea, which is has been named, I guess, on when I've seen people talking about it on TikTok, the Black Mermaid book, which I think is a pretty good summation, two-word summation, but it is so much more than that, as those of us who have been reading the book have found out. So if you are like just finding this, maybe you've heard about the book, you've clicked on this video, welcome. This is the Platform YA Book Club where we talk to an author about their books every single month, and this is our final one of the year. Very exciting. And so in the description there is a link to the Discord, so if you want to join the community you can. We discuss the book as we're reading. It's very fun, and you can also pose your questions to the authors. If you are joining us live, you can also post your questions in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat, so if anything comes up, if you get inspired during this talk and you want to ask a question, please do. The first half of this stream is going to be no spoilers, so if you haven't read the book, don't worry for this first section, and then we'll go into spoiler territory later. I will give you fair warning. It will all be fine. So hello, Natasha, how are you doing? How's it going?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm a little bit tired actually. Christmas shopping.
Nice and comfy. I love the Skin of a Sea poster behind you.
I know. Best.
Very looking very festive as well.
Yeah.
I've realized my copy. So I love the front cover of the book. Like, I think it's absolutely gorgeous. And I do feel like the arc, this, how beautiful is that? I got like one of the advanced copies. And even though I do really, really love the actual cover, I think this is like a really cool arc. It's like so shiny and scaly, and just looks amazing. So I was very excited to dive in. And then we talked with, we did a video for the platform channel. Don't know if people have seen that, about like mermaid mythology and writing about mythology in your work. That was amazing. And I got to hear so much about the kind of behind the scenes of the myths and things that you included in the book. So I'm very excited to be diving into that. So with that in mind, our first question is actually from a reader, Pippin, who asks, I'm assuming that a lot of the fantasy, as it were, within the book are existing folklore, such as some of the creatures as well as the gods being recognized in other cultures. How much is influenced by these existing stories and beliefs within the book? And then how much was your own kind of narrative spin on things?
I think a lot of it was influenced by stories that are already out there. So when you think of Umoja as an Orisha, and how she left the rivers and streams to follow the first enslaved, it kind of merges with the stories then that evolved from across the diaspora because of what they believed she did for the enslaved. So wrecking the slave ships or offering them comfort, and some believe that she returned her souls home. So it's kind of in between the origin of West Africa and how it's changed because of the slave trade. And I think that because of those stories and because of the lack of stories that I'd read in books and seen in films, a lot of it was influenced by that. I think that there was probably, I think, to be fair, Umoja creating Mami Wata is not one of the stories that I'd read. So that's probably one of the things that I changed, as well as as well as gathering and storing the souls in sapphire necklaces. That was mine as well. But not really that much. It was almost like the history and the stories merged together so that it almost felt like the story was telling itself. I know that sounds really cliche, but it was like drawing from all the stories that were already there and the history that is either not represented or misrepresented merged together to help me create the plot. So a bit of both, but mainly it was all there and just wanted to highlight and share it with everyone.
Is that where the inspiration for the story came from then, from that original mythology? Or did you have more of the relationships and characters first and then the myths sort of wove their way in there?
No, it's definitely the mythology, I think, because when I wanted to, I loved mermaids growing up, but again, I loved Splash, the Little Mermaid, but they were all white. And I wanted to write a story that was different and had characters that looked like me and the people that I grew up with. And so that was the main inspiration of wanting to do that. It was a bonus to discover more and go more in depth on the myths and the stories that are already out there. So yeah, I just wanted to do, you know, the kind of like the cliche advice is write the story that you want to read, but that's really what I did.
Amazing. How has the response been from readers and stuff? Have you seen a lot of people who have had a similar kind of feeling of like, oh, I kind of wish that I'd seen this already? Like this is something that I wanted to see kind of reflecting either like their own identities or just actual, you know, the reality of how diverse the world actually is.
I think it's been a mixture of people so glad to see themselves, even if it's a magical creature, even more so because it's a magical creature, because um, while other, you know, social issues are important, it's important to see yourself represented as something, you know, fantastical and in fantasy. So I think definitely that representation, and also people that have grown up hearing those stories as well. But then there's also been a lot of readers who are just happy to be exposed to something new,
Mm.
whether they see themselves and they didn't know much about West African history, or they didn't know anything about Black mermaids or history and the mythology around it. It's that excitement of reading something new and learning something new. And that's what I always love when I'm reading books as well. It's like, wow, I didn't know this. And yeah, I want to find out more. So it's been a mix of feeling glad that they've seen themselves, and seeing that book, because there were never any covers like that growing up. So yeah, I even people that haven't read the book, just to see that cover, um, and natural hair, and the fact that you're looking at a mermaid, but a black mermaid. So yeah, a mixture, but it's been, yeah, really positive actually, I would say.
Amazing. I feel like that's a thing that we've seen like a push of a lot of young people who have been very vocal about representation that and how important covers are to them. That I feel like we've seen this real explosion of book covers that have, especially for YA, that have people on the front that do showcase that diversity, that do showcase the kind of identities and experiences that they might find in the pages in a really positive way. That's been really kind of exciting to see. Thinking about like Iron Widow and Legendborn and like all of these different books. So I'm very happy, as I said, love my arc, but I really love the cover as it stands. Related to that, another question from a reader: how difficult was it finding a balance of the different languages that you use to make it understandable for an English speaking reader, but not taking the reader out of the story to explain like what every term means, if that makes sense? They've said
It does, because I've read books before that might have a different language, and usually it's probably something like French or Spanish, and you want to you want an element of authenticity, but you want to be able to read it without having to stop too much and try and work out, and without the reader assuming that you understand. So I think there's a balance between using Yoruba in the story in a way that enhances it and enhances the themes in a way that's easily understood, or you can kind of get the gist of what people are saying. So I tried to use it for the things that I thought were important to the book. So the prayers, terms of endearment, and food and hairstyles, without overusing it, but getting kind of having that touch here and there. Because I definitely think it's important to see a range of languages in stories, but in such a way that it doesn't not put you off, but become too much of a chore. So you're still enjoying the story, and it becomes a natural kind of organic and integral part of what's going on, rather than maybe throwing you off, and only the hardcore, you know, are still there kind of trying to like, no, I'm going to get through this and understand it. So yeah, it was a difficult, because I had the names are not in Yoruba, even the Orisha names are not in Yoruba, and that was specifically because beliefs of them are spread across the world, and so I didn't want to limit them just to being West African, because it's a spiritual belief system that's prevalent in South America, and lots of other places. So I didn't want to just kind of try and claim it for that point, especially since the story is at the bit where it's kind of diverging from West Africa and changing and evolving. So the language that was used there tries to kind of honor that, if that makes sense.
definitely. I mean, I really felt like you did that really well personally. Like I there are just these little elements of it that you know like with the prayers, because they're repeated, you get the repeated meaning in the different languages, like in English as well. Like you have the terms of endearment, and you have it not just a character repeating, like translating it as if for the audience, but Simi says like, why are they using the phrase little brother and big brother for two characters that we'll talk about later? And it's more about like her emotions about what's going on there and what that phrase means, rather than just like her repeating it for the sake of an audience, because like everyone speaks the same language, they don't have to translate for each other. So it was really, I thought, very well done within the narrative. I really kind of felt like that was super well done for me. You will find as we go through these live streams that these live streams are just Rowan tells the author how great they are for like 50 minutes and occasionally asks questions. So I want to ask about like when you have some authors come on here and they might have a book that's like completely like not based in mythology, not based in actual events or anything autobiographical, and it's all totally from almost nowhere. With this one, because it involves mythology but isn't like a straight up retelling, and it's got like your own twists on it and stuff like that. So how much did you have like a plan before writing? Was there anything that you knew had to be included because of the way that the myths work? Or were you very much like, we'll see what happens. I like this myth. I'll start writing. We'll get to an end point at some point. Like, what's that process like for you?
Do you know what? I thought that I was an organic writer. That I was just gonna, and that's why I used to kid myself for a long time. I could just write these stories, and however they turned out they turn out to be amazing, or however they were going to turn out, that's how they were supposed to be. And I should have known better because I'm quite an anal and organized person. And I don't know why I thought that's maybe I had the idea if that's what writers do and that's what they are. And, they've got so much talent that it just comes to them. And, it's just magically from your brain to however you're writing. But I think when I first had the idea, I always kind of write about 20,000 words to feel it out, to see if it's working for me. And once it was working for me, I knew then everything was in place. And so the mythology and the time of history that it's framed by, which is very, very important. But the characters and the plot itself, which is not defined by that point in history, needed to back up the whole concept, because it's a good concept, but unless the story and the plot and the characters are there, it's just not going to be any good. So I took it was when I was still teaching full time. So I wrote from probably January, researched and wrote from January till July, and then spent the 6 weeks holidays planning it out, using the 3-act sequence and post-it notes, which my cat used to then pull off the wall, which is annoying. But I plan it. I don't plan every chapter, but I plan kind of the beats of the story and the sequences. And that, not to say that didn't change, because it did change here and there, and then it changes when you're working with an editor too. But the main bits were there, and I think what it enabled me to do was to finish the book. Because I think sometimes, you start and you're excited and you're, gung-ho in writing what you're doing, and then you get to the middle and you're like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. You know how it's going to end usually, but you're like, what's going to happen now? So planning for me was really important. So the 3-act sequence really works for me. Because I think as well, when I was looking at that, you can look at that in terms of, it's not just reading books. Because then I read books, sometimes I just guzzle them almost. And I try to stop myself and read them as a writer rather than as a reader. Because I'm just like, if it's really good, I'm just reading.
Let's go, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Until you finished it and you're like, oh. So I think reading them as a writer and realizing how they've planned out their stories and the cliffhangers, the important beats, and how they've shown this aspect of a character and that relationship is really important. I find that quite hard because I just want to read it to enjoy it. But that helped when I was planning as well. So to force myself to do that.
Haven't had a question, but we have had a comment in the chat about talking about your use of language. It really works. The balances of language really work for them, which glad that everyone agrees with me. Speaking of, if there is anyone who has joined us since we did the little intro bit, if you have any questions for Natasha about writing, about Skin of the Sea, etc., put them in the chat. We can add them to ones I already have here. Another reader wants to know, are any of the characters inspired by your own experiences and people around you, or did you see it more as like mythic characters from like a story, something separate?
I think that Simi is a character who struggles with her identity. And I think I can see that a lot in my own, remembering how I was as a teenager and seeing my own teenagers. And also even as adults, people are still struggling with how they want to be perceived and how they are versus how they are, how they should be. So definitely that aspect of her character, you know, I'm gonna say I'm not gonna. I was gonna say a bit, but it might spoil a bit, so I'm not gonna say that. But
We'll take it to
people,
the
yeah,
spoiler section.
how people see her, she worries about that, and I think that's something that a lot of people still do, even as adults. I think that Yinka reminds me of some of my friends growing up, quite fierce and vicious, but out of a place of care. And Collar, so sometimes I think, especially in the beginning, I think Collar's quite arrogant and a bit kind of self-entitled. And that's definitely people that I've known when I was a teenager as well, and still as an adult. So I think they have elements of things that you've experienced before, but they're not based entirely on one person. There's probably different aspects. I would say that there's probably a bit of me and Simi and definitely a lot of me and Yinka. So
I like how you're like, yeah, Collar in the beginning is a little bit so. I just love that bit where Simi finds out that he's who he is in his village, and she's just like, yeah, that checks out. Like
yeah,
that
that
makes sense.
makes sense
Makes
now. It
sense.
all makes sense. Yeah, yeah.
That was so
Typical. I knew
good.
it.
um, we I wanted to ask as well, like, I guess I kind of want to talk about characters since we started chatting about them. And it's not really a spoiler because we kind of get it from the very beginning that we get these like flashbacks or flashes from Simi of her life. Where did that decision come from to have that? Like, did you see it as being very linked to the fantasy elements? Did you want it to have that kind of linked to more realistic trauma response stuff, and more like reality of if someone had been gone through something traumatic or a big change that they might want to like stop themselves remembering until they were ready? Like where did you see that relationship to her in those flashbacks, as well as it obviously being like a useful narrative device for you to be able to give us some insight back into her character?
I think it's definitely a traumatic response, but it's also linked to her being a creature other than human. So in the beginning, she's more like a creature. And as she has those flashbacks, it's like she's regaining her humanity. But I also think the transatlantic slave trade is an integral part to the story, but it's not a complete focus. But because of Simi is who she is because of that. She saves Collar because of that. So it can't be, even though that's not the main point of the plot and the story, you can't ignore it throughout the story. So if you're understanding who she is and what she's gone through and why she's made the decisions that she has, that comes hand in hand. But I didn't want the story to be it had to have an understanding of that period of time, but not be its complete focus. So I wanted the focus to be more on magic and courage, but you still needed to gain an understanding of what has happened. Because what has happened, what happens to all of us forms it makes us who we are. And whether that's good or bad, you can't escape it. It's almost like you have to feel it and go through that to come out the other side. So it was definitely to represent that time period, but also to move her on and to show her strength of character and how and who she is now and how that happened and why she is the way she is and why she's made the choices that she has. Yeah. And also I think it's a period of time that's ignored, to be honest. I think it's like, that was, oh, you need to move on and get over it. But it's not ever really, I mean, how many statues commemorate that in England? We've had this discussion recently. It's ignored, and I don't think it should be. So while the story isn't about that, I wanted to make sure that it brought elements of that and made people aware of what happened and how it happened.
I was going to ask, was it always going to be set at this point in history? Because obviously a lot of YA is very like contemporary, like set in modern times, or if it's fantasy, it's very removed from our world. Was that always like a thing that you had in your head from the beginning, or did that come as like inspiration later in the process?
I think because the story was inspired by that evolving folklore of Black mermaids, and that's heavily linked to the slave trade.
Mm.
You can't separate the two. You know, they believe that if you died at sea, your soul would be returned home. So it's strongly linked. So I don't think there's any way around not having that in the book and
Mm.
discussing that in the book.
I think one of the things that was really refreshing in a way is that balance that you have between this is not going to be ignored, like this is a huge part of it, but ultimately showing life outside of that for like people at the time, right? Like it's not a case of like, so it was just here is the period, you don't know anything about like these people apart from that they suffered horribly, have fun, the end. It's like, no, actually, there's like whole cultures and families and civilizations and belief systems and like everything that are continuing and are being affected by this, but also have their own stories. And like that was such an exciting thing for me reading it to see that, to kind of see that balance was amazing.
But I think that's the whole point of setting it at that period of time. So I think a lot of when I think of stories that deal with that, it's often the focus is put on America, on North America.
Yeah.
Um, and so, you know, it's what happened to Simi was what was later named as the Middle Passage. But at that point, when the Portuguese first landed there and were kidnapping people and taking them back to Europe, it wasn't called the Middle Passage, although you were on ships. It wasn't called that. And I think, you know, I think if you spoke to a lot of people and asked them how it started, they wouldn't be able to tell you. They could tell you probably about America and the Caribbean, but they wouldn't be able to tell you who started it, how did it start. And so I think that's really important to give that aspect to it, to know that it's not, you know, it's not just an American thing, and it didn't just happen there. And also I think, you know, you're right, there was a massive amount of dehumanization that occurred so that they could do that. And I think it's really important to show, because I hate it when you know, I did a lot of research, I love history, but looking at the way they portrayed people, it wasn't like that at first. The Europeans were in awe of what they found. You know, when they arrived on the coast of West Africa, using advances in shipbuilding technology taken from North Africa, they were amazed at, you know, the architecture and street lamps. And, you know, at that point in medieval England, if you looked at London, it was like a cesspit, really. So, and I think it's easier to erase that history and to dehumanize everyone, to kind of say, you know, we did a good thing. We're civilizing people. We're bringing them religion. We're bringing, you know, you know, it's so I wanted to strongly highlight that that wasn't the case in terms of community, knowledge, architecture, astronomy, all of that.
Makes a lot of sense. Going back to character quickly, this is just a very self-indulgent question, but I asked it the other month, and now I'm like, I'm just going to ask it to every author from now on. If you could write something else, like within this universe, that's like maybe a short story, a book, whatever, but from another one of the characters' points of view, or something more about their story, whether it's their past or like something that's going to happen to them in the future in your mind, or what they were up to while stuff in the events of the book were happening. Do you have like a character that you're like, oh, I just really like to write something around them? Like it wasn't right for this book, but I kind of want to spend more time with them if you could.
Yinka, definitely.
Agreed. I love her so much. Every time you were like, she's just got some couple of axes, I'm like, oh, this is so cool.
I want axes. Yeah, exactly.
So cool. And I think you like, obviously you know your characters, so this shouldn't be a surprise. Like, and I'm not saying this, but like the way that you described earlier in the stream about her being like tough, but like for empathetic reasons almost. Like she cares, but the way she shows it is in her like her skills as a fighter, and like her that like legacy of like where that came from for her just makes complete
Definitely. And she doesn't really care, because I mean, I shaved my hair off at one point as well, and she doesn't really care. I think I probably put that from me in there. She doesn't really care what people think, but the people that she does care about, she's going to go all out for them.
Mm,
And that's what I love the
totally.
most about her.
Oh my God. Love that we're on the same wavelength about this because I'm just like, yes, there's so much. Something else I want to talk about. This is has like a really strong like quest narrative to it. Like that feels like it's the underlying kind of journey. Which again feels very like mythic, like it feels like it's connected in. Were you interested in those sort of like quest or journey myths for this, or was that more coming from like more modern fiction and stories that you enjoyed, or was it kind of a combo of the two?
I definitely love, an adventure story, but I think I'd probably say rather than books, because I haven't really read many that I'm drawn to. Like I'm not really probably shouldn't like I don't know. I'm not really I never read Lord of the Rings. I watched the
Mm.
films. I never read Lord of the Rings. It was too long and dense for me. Um, but my favorite films like The Goonies and Indiana Jones, and I love that kind of high action,
Mm.
fast paced adventure. And that's what if I'm reading a fantasy and or adventure story, I want it to be kind of bang, bang, bang. I want excitement. I want cliffhangers. I don't want a drawn out ending. So selfishly, I wrote the way I wanted to read it. So it's like Marmite. Some people like it, some people don't. And I like that kind of, that high octane, what's happening now, this happened, that person's, I won't ruin it. I was just about to say something.
Which
I'm
it,
going to be told off by someone else because I kind of ruined part of the story for them by telling, yeah. So
it's fine. We got the spoiler section a bit, so we can like dig right into that. Also the chat is in agreement with you about wanting a Yinka book. That's the readers also agree.
I've actually been planning it already. So yeah.
We'll talk about that in a sec, but I'm very excited to ask about it. What I mean, so one thing I wanted to ask, because we kind of talked about the idea of like tapping into like teenage readers and what they're interested in and seeing what they're excited about. Was that something that you had in mind, or that you found like easy, or that you found a challenge when writing, like thinking about the audience and thinking about young people who might be reading it, like wanting to make it relevant to them, or wanting to make it kind of interesting or exciting, or feel like it works for them? Or were you sort of like you started writing and you're like, I guess this is for teenagers, like this seems like the audience?
No, I've been reading a lot for the last few years. I've been reading a lot of young adult fiction. I think because my degree was in English and creative writing, and we had to read certain books. And after that, not that they are not good, but books that are, you might read books that have been shortlisted for this list or that list, or they're out and they've had rave reviews. And some of them I really liked, and some of them I just found really boring and dry. And I wanted that adventure story to them. And I found that you get that with young adult books. And I think the ones that I've liked the most have been, and this is with a lot of children's stories, so as a teacher and as a mother, stories that don't dumb it down or sanitize it, because
Yeah.
there's almost like it's because you're not an adult, we need to make it pretty, or we need to make it safe for you. And I think I just disagree with that completely. But I do find young adult fiction more exciting. But having said that as well, I was kind of writing it just with the story in mind. But then my son, who was 15, 16 at the time, would read certain bits, especially the fight scenes. And so he would tell me if it's exciting enough or if it's gory enough. Otherwise, he'd just like, I don't want to read anymore because it's boring now. So I'm like, right then.
Good beta reader
Yeah.
situation. We have, so the person who asked that first question right at the beginning, Pippin, it is indeed Lord of the Rings reference. So their name on the stream is always Hitchhiker Hobbit, and they have said, I am a big Lord of the Rings fan, obviously, but I agree, it is quite a dense book. So I'm like, yes, yeah, that's...
I've got a short attention span.
There's just a lot of, we're like randomly a lot of like
yeah.
songs in those books. So you're just the dwarves just love a good sing song.
I think if I was to listen to an audio, it would be different now. But at the time, I just wanted to read kind of, I like the kind of short, exciting. I love point horror books when I was growing up. So, and they were really short. I think I got used to that and spoiled by that. And so, yeah.
We were actually saying when we were talking about the book, like it was, for me at least, it was like ideal chapter length, and then also cliffhanger, end of chapter cliffhangers, especially that like first act of the book, which is the kind of stuff we discuss. Like we gush about the characters and then we're like, everyone's really into discussing chapter length at the moment in all the books that we read, because we had some books that had like some chapters were like half a page, and then we've had some that were like a lot longer, and like we didn't realize until we started to think about it like what a difference it makes to like have cliffhangers, or to have like different,
Oh
how
no,
like speedy the book feels, or how
I
like
thought about that a lot, because I am one of those people that I can't, if you know, if you're reading before bed, I can't finish in the middle of a chapter. I have to read to the end of the chapter. So if the chapters are really long, I'm like, oh, I'm kind of just rushing my way through it. Yeah. Or if they're too short, I'm like, what was the point in that? So yeah.
Oh, we have another comment from Gem Football, who says, and I realize I don't know how to pronounce this character's name. Is it Issa or Isa or
Issa.
Issa? Issa was my favorite character. Pippin also agreed. There was a lot of like commenting. I was like, as I was reading, typing on the Discord, like really worried about this character. I was like, this angel better not come to any sticky ends. We will discuss in the spoiler section whether they do or not, which we're almost at actually. Also, we'll do a couple more questions non-spoiler section. So if anyone has any questions that they want to ask before we get into spoilers, do put them in the chat. And then I'll ask a couple before. Let's see what I can see if there's anything that I've missed out from people's questions. So I don't want anyone to not have their question asked. Oh, a question that we have been asked by one of the readers who wants to know, and I'm sure that there are other people watching who are in the same position. Do you have any advice for young people who are interested in writing, who are excited about like writing themselves? Do you have any advice, or like a piece of advice you were given that was really useful, or I guess a piece of advice you given that was shit and you want to warn them against it? That's also also an option.
I think it's not to be told that your story should be like the standard kind of old white authors, old white men. It like and to write the story that you want, even if you don't try and write what you think people will want to read, or what will be in the next, you know, next few months on book talk or whatever. I think I think the hardest thing, and this is the best advice I would give, is to keep on writing, even if you think it's rubbish. What I used to do is I used to write maybe a chapter and then obsessively read over that chapter, and then you're not getting much further than that, or that, and then I would start to overthink it, and then I'll be like, oh, this is rubbish. Like I'm not doing it. And I think there are, when you're doing that first draft, there are bits of the book that are you know, you're like, oh, that definitely needs to be edited. But I'll come back to it. So I think it's pushing on, because even that sense of achievement when you're, you know, like a quarter of the way through the book, and then when you finish the book, it's motivation enough to keep you going, and sometimes to bring your writing back alive. So I would say, yeah, don't give up. Don't kind of go back and obsess over what you've done or whether it's good enough. Just keep going. And try and find people that you trust to read your work. Not people that are just going to say, yeah, it's amazing. But people to say, well, I don't understand why that person's doing that. Or like, you know, why do you use the word cold all the time? And then you realize you've used it 50 million times in a chapter. So yeah, find people that you trust to read it, and don't stop to obsess. Just keep going.
Amazing. That's great advice. Everyone in the chat is agreeing that short chapters are great and cliffhanger chapters are great. So well done on that as well. We are going to go into the spoiler section, but just so everyone has a chance to pause, to make sure that they don't get spoiled, I'm going to give you plenty of time. I will ask you a transitional question, which is always a great question to ask, because I feel like it's the one that stumps so many readers, so many authors, because they get paralyzed with the choice. Do you have any authors or books that you would recommend to anyone on the stream right now? Maybe people who are looking for like last minute holiday presents, or stuff to read over Christmas, or kind of people that you've liked recently, or you know, have liked for a long time, that you think would be kind of fun for YA readers?
I would say The Gilded Ones by Namina Fauna, Ray
Another
Bearer and
excellent,
Redemptor.
both of them very excellent book covers as well. I feel like beautiful.
Ray Bearer and Redemptor by Jordan Ifireko. And what did I really enjoyed The Wolf and the Woodsman as well. I think it's Ava Reed. Slightly more adult, slightly gory, but I kind of like that dark. I also like the book Warm Bodies. I love zombie films and books. So The Forest
Very
of
nice.
Hands and Teeth by Carrie Ryan as well is amazing if you like that apocalyptic zombie. There's not too much brain eating, but I like those. I'm trying to think, because I read so much that I sometimes forget what I've read.
That's too
Witches
much.
Steeped in Gold by Shannon Smart. I'm looking now, all of the. Yeah, I think those are the ones that come to mind. And I've
It's a
just
great read.
bought Lionheart Girl, and I'm reading The Last Graduate at the minute.
Yep.
Bad Witch Burning and Iron Widow to read. I've got quite a lot of books that I'm planning to work my way through over Christmas and ignore everyone else.
I was about to, I was like, oh, I can show you. And I realized I'm using my books to prop up this laptop. So I was like, yeah, I'll give my Rex. Yeah, Iron Widow. I mean, anyone on the Discord knows I loved Iron Widow. It was great. I'm very excited for that to get a sequel and a multi-million-pound adaptation in my dreams. If I have anything to do with it, it will happen. Sweet. So, okay, we're in spoiler territory now. We've given people enough notice, so we can talk about everything, including the ending. And the first question I have from a reader, from every single reader who's ever read this book: sequel, Natasha. What is happening? You can't end it there. You like.
I wouldn't end it there if there was not a sequel. That would be too bad. Yeah, it should be coming out autumn next year. Oh so God, it's in edits at the minute. I finished writing it. I finished writing it this year actually. And there's a lot of things that I didn't have space to put in book one that have made it into book two. So yeah, I'm quite excited about that.
Oh my God, you've ruined my next question, which was going to be like stuff that you didn't have space to include or stuff you wanted to explore. But I don't want you to spoil anything in the next book. So I feel like that's a terrible question to now ask you.
It's not, because I thought if I were reading this book, what would I want more of? And I would want more mermaids. So, and
because I feel like we had like the tiniest little hint. We had like a tiny little hint where she was kind of explaining the mythology and like the idea that she could like sense when there were other like creatures like her around, and she had that sense, but we never really got to see that sense being used. And so
I mean, I feel bad for UK readers because the US edition has the first chapter of book two in the back.
It's fine. We'll cope. We'll be fine. That is so cool though. I'm so excited about that. That ending as well. Talking about fight scenes. Like I was gonna say, and then I was like, no, that's too much of a spoiler earlier on when you were saying how like liking like fast, choppy endings and da. Like I was like almost at the end of this book, and I was like, wait, I don't have that many pages left. Like what is happening? Because I was like, there better be I was like, Natasha, there better be a sequel, because it is so like fast paced. Like it is that moment where she like grabs him around the neck, and like I could just see it. It was like it was a film in my head. It was like the coolest action sequence in the world. And like it's my favorite thing in books, where you have a point earlier in a book where you're like, that's going to come back. That's obviously something that's going to come back, which is obviously her diving down off the ship and making this deal. And like, you don't know what the deal is as the reader, but you know it's going to come back. But then you get so engrossed in the story and the emotions of the story that even though at that point when you read it, you're like, I'm going to remember that. That will come up later. You totally forget until the end when she's plunging into the sea and you're like, oh, she's going for the deal. Like, this is it. Like, it was just so cool to have that like moment. I love when that happens. Was that always the ending for you? Like, were you someone who knew like where this was ending and where it was going from the beginning, or did you have like different options for what might happen in that end sequence?
I always knew she was gonna pull him off. I just had in my mind, in the very, very first draft, she pulled him off a ledge and into, at that point, his palace was kind of at the top of the volcano. She pushed him into like the volcano or the chasm there. But I knew that I wanted her to do it, because again, I didn't want it to be a collar. I wanted her to do the saving of everyone, rather than the other way around. She always has to sort out everyone in this book, really, and the ending is no different from that. So I wanted her to overcome and have that strength to do it. It's only, yeah, I don't see. That's the weird way. I have it all planned, but then sometimes things click and I just add them, or it just slightly like, ooh. I even impress myself sometimes. I'm like, oh, as if I'm reading it. I'm like,
Natasha,
oh,
look
that'd
at
be
you go.
amazing. Yeah, that'd be good. Why didn't I think of that before? So yeah, I mean, I like twists, and I know that the end is a little bit abrupt, but that's how I like my endings as well. So it's Marmite to some people,
I
but I
loved
think
it.
if it
I
wasn't a
loved it.
sequel, I wouldn't have done it like that,
Yeah.
basically. But I don't like it when I read a book as well, and sometimes it's the end is dragged on for another 2 chapters. I'm like, I didn't even need to read these chapters really, because it's just tying up like minor loose ends. But yeah, I knew that she was gonna mess him up, basically.
Oh my God,
Had to be.
love that. We had a really sweet question come in on the chat. Jen Football wants to know, who are your biggest supporters? People supporting you in your life, telling you great, not just your child telling you the action sequences could use work.
I know. But they do, to be fair, my children do they've listened to the plot over and over and over. Like I can see their like faces just glaze sometimes. Like, but so, okay, right. Focus. Everyone look at me, because I can tell they're like, by then they finish their food, they just want to go. But no, look at me. If this happens, do you think it's exciting enough? If this happens after, and they're like, yeah. Or sometimes they'll come up with like, a good little nugget or a little like plot twist. But yeah, they're the ones that jump up and down when there's news. I have a friend from university that I speak to most days, and she has to also. I talk a lot, so sometimes I don't even need people to talk back to me. I just need to talk through the plot and what's happening in my mind, and then I'm like, thank you so much. So I didn't say anything. I'm like, yeah, don't worry. You didn't need to just listen to me. So her, and then I've got another close friend who she just assumes everything amazing is going to happen for me. And that, I think that motivation, that belief then gives you that belief. So yeah, there's a couple of close people. And I think that because I don't show my writing to many people. And it has to be people that you trust that are going to give you, not just a good feedback, because you can big anyone up, but it needs to be constructive as well, but in a way that's not going to make me cry and make me kind of like throw my notebook across the room. So, and people that are happy for you, people that are excited. Yeah, those are the biggest ones. But because I've talked the plot through so much of them, the oldest two haven't actually finished reading the book yet, which I'm quite disgusted about. But they're like, we know what happened.
Oh, we know it.
Yeah, but I'm quite offended by that.
Classic. Okay, here's before I get into the real question, I'll go with because I did write this question down twice, and then I was like, okay, I guess that Collar didn't actually die, so I can I don't have to ask that question. But like, was there a version where he died? Like, was there any part of you that was like, maybe he's just gone?
No.
Or you're like, no, this is all part of the
I can't kill him, because I can't kill him because I couldn't kill him. Because in my mind, he's definitely there in a few other stories. So I couldn't kill him now.
Oh, I love that.
I didn't even think about that now. I mean, maybe he might die.
Okay, that's fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine. For now. Okay, but why did it have to die though? Like why did
you know what? Someone said that to me the other day. I kind of ruined the story for the person reading it. They were reading
that was what it was.
And I think I said, oh yeah, well, someone died. And he was like, will it better not be Issa? I'm like,
it's a face that will give it away.
And then they wouldn't talk to me for a while.
Yeah, literally. It's really funny because in the Discord chat, it's like me saying under like spoiler tags, being like, I have a really bad feeling that he's gonna die. And then literally like 10 minutes later, I'm like, okay, I was right. Like that happened. And there was just these elements of it. And I was like, as someone like similar to what you were saying about when you watch or read stuff with the mind of like thinking about narrative and thinking about how it's structured and things like that, which I kind of love to do. As soon as that little boy snuck onto that ship, I was like, oh no, he's a goner.
I know, what are you doing? They told you to go home. It's like, I think the thing is as well, like you know, it is kind of cruel, but to have that emotional impact or that emotional response, you have to kill the best or the cutest or, the person that hasn't done anything wrong. I didn't have to kill him, but I like the fact that he was always there trying to look after everyone, especially Collards, trying to look after him, do everything for him. And so it made sense that when he's being attacked, he, tries to help. And like, a lot of little children, they try and help and then they just get in the way. Obviously they don't get killed by the Sasa Bonsan, but it just made sense that he, we told you to stay at home. We told you, like, because you're too little and you're too pure and you're too cute to come to this bit of the story. And it was quite bad. And I did feel bad, a little bit bad writing it, but then I thought as well, like, it would make me feel so sad, and like I want to feel those different emotions in a story. And I think if I'm trying to talk my way out of it, but I'm sure people will be annoyed with me because I killed him off.
But like, here's the thing though, she's had, like, you kind of almost had to have that moment because she's dealt with death for so long, like it's just become a part of the routine for her, and she had this moment of like, well, I can't actively kill someone, so I can't even watch this person die, I'm gonna save this guy. But then to have like actual meaningful death that seems like so like unnecessary in front of her that she can't, like, this isn't that she isn't detached from, like she has that close relationship to, like you were saying earlier about her becoming more like a person or becoming more kind of herself, as it were, and coming into her identity. Like, it made sense, however much I hate it, it did make sense. It was great from a book point of view. My emotions,
it makes her more determined.
Sad.
It makes her more determined as well, because when you get to that point and you're at that point where you're like, not you don't have anything to lose, because she does obviously, but it makes you even more like there's no way I'm getting to this point or getting there without killing you. That's it. Or sorting you out. So I think it had to happen.
Also really like similar stuff, like I really wondered about like the foreshadowing stuff that you had in there, or like things that kind of came back like a second or third time, like whether that was stuff that was planned in, or whether like you wrote the story and afterwards you were like, I should probably add this little bit. Like the ones I really loved were, there's like a few times where she has these interactions with like water creatures or creatures in the sea, and she realizes that she's able to control them to a certain degree, but it's always sort of defensive at first, like it's trying to keep them away or just being like, just stop. And then in that final sequence where she realizes that she can command them to like almost like an army, that she has these like creatures will have her back because she is part of that, like she's part of them, she's part of that world, was like so cool. I was like, oh my god, she's previous to this, that's just been like her last resort, like coping mechanism to like keep the creature away, keep those sharks away in that first initial sequence. And then she has these eels like slithering around and like dragging him down and stuff. I was like, oh yeah, so badass. But like, was that always like a plan all the way through when you had those little bits that like crop up again and again, or like when you had him right at the beginning when Collar was like awkwardly trying to hide what was going on with his siblings and how they were special, like was that stuff that you added in afterwards to like drop hints for the reader, or was it from the beginning like you already had those in mind, so you kind of knew that it was kind of coming through?
Dropping the siblings, the hint that was dropped in because the plot was slightly changed with the siblings, but her power, I think, was something that I didn't. First of all, she's at the beginning, she's very much still a creature, right? Like, with a bit of humanity, and I didn't want her to probably juxtapose with the European slavers. She didn't want to use that power. She didn't have to. So she's only really using it when she needs to. And then almost, I think as well, when you're growing up and even as an adult, when you realize that you have more power than you ever thought, and whether that's a skill that you have or a talent that you didn't believe in, and then suddenly, well, not suddenly, but over time or certain aspects make you realize, actually I'm really good at this, or I can do this. That was what I wanted to give with that, the use of power, but also as she's becoming more confident in herself and how she can use her powers to not get what she wants, but to do what she wants and to get results to help people in the way that she wants to do it. So it was a building up of being able to do that and using what she previously didn't really like because she still longed, she still thought about being human, using that, but using it in a positive way. So embracing both sides of her, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone in the chat is just still crying over our boy.
I know, he is very
The
cute.
book in general. I just love those little like we talked a little bit about when we were filming the mythology video about the fact that you were like, well, I can't just have the black mermaids. Like I'm gonna have to pick some other myths to come in. For this sequel, obviously you can't say too much, but are we getting any other myths like creeping in there, or are we just gonna get more of the ones that we've seen already?
You do get more. Yeah, you do get more. You definitely get more of the Orisha side of things. And you get slightly more of, but no, you definitely get more of mermaids. Yeah, and there's a few other things that I couldn't, because I think it just becomes then the more that you kind of read or dig into things that you already know, the more you're like, oh, I can't not. How can I not?
All this like element more, or like
Yeah, I
yeah.
think I wanted to explore this and this, or okay, so in my mind I'm having this bit in the story now. What can I have that's not what is usually portrayed or everyone else has? Yeah, I'm trying to. You can tell I'm trying not to say
Trying to be yeah subtle about it. That's good. That's better. Like you're careful about the spoilers now. After that encounter, you're like, I'm gonna be
yeah,
real careful about it.
yeah, yeah.
We're almost at the end, but if anyone in the chat has any other questions, do let me know. Other questions come in. Was the was like the secret identity betrayal stuff, was that always going to be the character it was, like this sort of slightly outsider character, or was there ever a moment where it was like, oh, this could be someone else in the gang, like whether it was them or like someone who was like him disguising himself as them, like whether there was any point in which like Yinka was actually had been this god all along, or was it always going to be this slightly outside character?
It was always going to be Eshu, because I think that another thing that the West did was to take African spiritual beliefs and demonize them. So Eshu was always portrayed as the devil and evil, and he's not. He is a trickster, but he's not inherently evil. So I wanted to show that in the book. And you kind of, he's kind of like, well, this is why I am. And I wanted that. So I wanted that kind of, that two-facedness to come from him, because that's his nature. That's the way he is and what he does, and everyone knows that. He's kind of almost like, you can't. This is who I am. But there's also that kind of, if I think about X-Men, that's the way I can describe it. Of Magneto doing things because he thinks he's helping in a way, and Eshu in a way, even though he is tricking and doing bad things, he's doing it because he thinks he's doing the right thing. And I didn't want her to be betrayed by anyone that she'd forged those relationships with. So no, it was always going to be him, none of the other characters.
That makes a lot of sense. That does make a lot of sense. And I think that's really clear, like again, because I remember us talking about that element of it, and like I think it's really clear within the characters of like, this is not necessarily like inherently pure evil. Like Simi talks about that specifically to the other characters, like that's not what it is. Like there's like a sense of being able to, like, potentially can we talk to him, like can we reason with him, can we gain his respect, like all of these things above just like this is a creature who must be killed, and that's like the beginning and end of it. So I really definitely felt that in the writings were coming through. We are pretty much at the end, so I'm going to normally when we do this we talk about like potential sequel stuff, but I feel like we know that that's happening very excitingly. I am already so thrilled about that. I'm so excited. We're thinking, for people who are like part of the book club, we're thinking about doing like a little book club sequel panel, because we've had so many authors who are now like, they've got sequels coming out for the books that we read, and I think it'd be so fun to get you guys like on a panel together and like chatting about the new books and like how it was diving into the worlds again, and like sounds like it'll be very exciting. So potentially that might be coming in later next year when these sequels are out. Do you, I guess then, is there anything, I'm assuming what you're working on next is the sequel, or like you were saying you kind of got the draft in, it's just kind of working on it. Do you have any other plans, anything else coming up, or are you kind of focused on the Skin of the Sea sequel stuff?
Um, so yeah, the sequel is at the copy edit stage, and so because my brain needs to be busy, and so that's why I'm thinking about the Yinka story while I'm doing
Mm.
that. There's also a little Yumbo story in there as well that won't leave me. So that's something that I might focus on, and whether that's like more of a novella rather than anything else. Yinka's story is definitely book length, but the
Mm.
Yumbos is probably a novella. But I just love the whole world, so I think that there's so much to explore. Even the Orishas, there's so much more. There's so many more stories within that
Mm.
story um, that I would love to work on. So yeah, that's the plan at the minute.
I didn't want to say anything about Yinka's final moments in this, but like the last time we see in this book, because I feel like that's like I don't want to even mention it because I don't want to force you in a position where you have to like say no comment for the sequel or say anything about it. So I'm like, I just don't want to know, even though I am
Yeah,
like,
let's not talk about
I
Yinka.
just love her so much. But that is so exciting, and I know that everyone who has read the book and has been following along is going to be so excited to hear that, because yeah, we need more of this world, we need more stuff in it, and I'm just so excited to see kind of what happens. And I know that fantasy has been so like has had such a it's always been an incredible genre, but it feels like it's had such a renaissance in YA in the last year or two. And everyone's so excited about the genre, so I feel like there's gonna be lots of people coming in, and as I predicted, the chat is full of people being like heart eyes, exciting, very, very pumped for the sequel. But yeah, we've run out of time yet again. These go so fast. Thank you so much for joining us, Natasha. This has been so lovely and answering everyone's questions. I know that they really appreciate it. As do I. My favorite time of the month, where I just get to force an author to talk to me for an hour about how much I like their books. Um, yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thanks for having me, and thank you to everyone who's bought and read the book, or got it from a library, or borrowed it from a friend, or yeah, it's been amazing. I'm so glad that everyone's enjoying it.
Incredible. Normally this is the point where I tell people, remember we're reading this book next time. We don't have another book. We don't have another book to tell you about. The book club is continuing, but we are just figuring out what authors we want to talk to next year. So if you guys want to join us on Discord, the link is in the description, or following platform on social media. We will be posting as soon as we have nailed down exactly what authors we're going to be working with. But yeah, very, very excited for the future of the book club. And thank you so much, Natasha, for joining us.
Thanks.
And it's done. We are off the stream.